If there will ever be discussions about who is the most evil antagonist to exist in the fantasy genre, there is a high chance that Griffith's name will be heard in it. All those who have read Berserk as well as various other fantasy stories know the extent of evil and heinous crimes that Griffith, or now Femto, has committed in his past. His crimes and actions were not simply an act of evil, but were also betrayal, violation, and brutality of the highest possible level, ripping off every shred of humanity in existence. And that too was committed towards his closest comrades. But Griffith has more to his character than just being called a demonic villain, as his actions has a cause and a long story. He is a layered character who has subtle as well as complex emotions throughout his journey, from being a child with dreams to becoming the devil of hatred and even beyond that manifestation. Miura has written Griffith with incredible intricacies. I believe that Griffith is the most complex character written by Kentaro Miura in his entire career, and this is the reason why he strikes its readers as an extremely fascinating character. After all, he is the best character creation of the best ever mangaka to walk this planet. So in this video, let's walk through the life and actions of Griffith and understand this character on a deeper level. Griffith is shown to be born as a commoner in a nameless city. He is described as a street urchin and is most probably an orphan raised in the alleyways. His childhood was full of hardships and poverty, where he needed to struggle every day to even afford a piece of bread. Most probably, this harsh upbringing created the vacuum in his life, resulting in his lifelong dream for the relentless pursuit of a kingdom of his own. As a kid, he was mesmerized by the sight of the royal castle situated on the highlands, casting its shadow as well as the immense wealth and power disparity on the streets and homes of the commoners of the kingdom. This mesmerizing sight gave Griffith a purpose and meaning to his life, and therefore all of his actions from this moment were focused to achieve that dream, a grand dream to have a kingdom of his own. Now it is not clear that whether Griffith's strong desire for a kingdom was a naturally occurring thought of his own, or was it planted in his destiny by the members of the God Hand, as he was already fated to become Femto, the fifth and final member of the group of the demonic angels. Whatever may be the reason for Griffith's choice of this relentless path, his actions and choices were of his own, and they shaped heavily the outcomes in the universe of Berserk and its characters. Griffith was extremely talented right from the inception of his fated journey. He was a trained swordsman, a brilliant tactician, a charismatic leader, and a genius manipulator. His dedication towards his goals were commendable, as despite being a commoner, Griffith is said to be a literate person and therefore knew how to read and write, which was an extraordinary achievement for someone of his status in those times. He mastered the skills of the nobles that could only be accessed by the rich elites, all through himself, as he knew that these skills will allow him to become a high-ranking individual in that grueling and unjust society. Achieving such rare skills despite being born a commoner showed his relentless determination towards his ambition for gaining power in the hierarchy. He further establishes his own mercenary force known as the Band of the Hawks, which allowed him access in the circle of the elites as well as making him a representative and a face of a group of dedicated soldiers. It was through the soldiers of this group that turned Griffith into somewhat of a divine and powerful character among men. His lore started to grow across the kingdom of Midland through his soldiers. His comrades would constantly appreciate him as a genius prodigy and admire his charisma and aura among themselves. His extremely magnetic and surreal personality would give them a hope for their own life, making them feel a part of something significant and worthwhile, which would result in their strong dedication and commitment towards his goals. On the inside, Griffith was unshakable as a mountain when it came to his emotions and relationships. Throughout the years, he had mastered control over his sentiments rather than allowing these sentiments control his actions. He had already buried them under the weights of his ambitions. He was determined towards his goals with a no-compromise commitment, even if he had to sabotage his own feelings and emotions for the path he chose. Deviating from that path was strictly out of question for Griffith, even if it meant harm and violation for himself. He was without hesitation ready to throw himself under uncomfortable circumstances if his logic and plans asked him to do it. Griffith was very well aware about his astonishingly beautiful and androgynous appearance, which could attract and deceive most men as well as women, and hence he logically takes advantage of his appearance for his personal and military gains. Like in one instance, he offered himself sexually to the Tudor noble noble Lord Ganon to secure funds and employment for his mercenary group in order for it to survive and also save his soldiers from starvation and further casualties. He believed that this method of seduction was far more lucrative and logical than going on a war with the powerful nobles and lose even more men in the process. But this sacrifice by Griffith for his band was not because of his love and care for his men. Rather, it was solely directed for his grand dream. Seducing an old noble like Lord Ganon didn't just make his band money, but it also gave him political power and advantage over the other large mercenary groups. Griffith behind the curtains was actually climbing the ladder of power and control. After his business with Lord Ganon, Griffith opens up and expresses his feelings about his grand ambitions and also about his relationship with his comrades to Casca. Initially, it seemed that Griffith was disturbed by the death of the young boy in his troop as well as the casualties he received in the war, stating that maybe the young boy, like the others, was killed mainly because of the pursuit of his dream. This incident highlighted that maybe Griffith was actually a benevolent leader who values the life of his comrades in his relentless endeavor. But later we are contradicted when he states that the death of his comrades for his grand dream does not bother him at all, stating that it was them who chose to serve him for his ambitions. But in the later panels we can clearly see that this was not the case. The number of corpses that his dreams have laid was now starting to burden him emotionally. Griffith was seemingly in a mental turmoil. This scene and his dialogue showed that he was fighting two opposite emotions inside of him. One was the more obvious, passionate and powerful emotion for his lifelong dreams and goals, and the other was the faint emotion of sadness and guilt, which showed that Griffith still had a heart to feel for the others, especially for his dead comrades even during the blind pursuit of his goals. The clash of both these emotions inside of him resulted in an irritating and a helpless outburst, which clearly showed a kind of a mental breakdown he has at this point. This shows that though Griffith would suppress all his emotions and behave as a man with a cold heart in order to not compromise on his life ambitions, he was definitely vulnerable and had a breaking point like all other formidable warriors. And we all know that later in the story, Griffith even reached that emotional breaking point. But let's discuss those events later in the chronological order. While growing the band of the Hawks, Griffith finally meets the biggest missing piece of his destiny, Guts. The man who would shape the fate of Griffith, who would further shape the fate of the world. Griffith met many men, comrades, soldiers, nobles and outlaws throughout his quest for power. But Guts was different. He was the first person to ever touch the deep buried human inside of Griffith. Everyone until now was just a soldier and a means of progress for Griffith's grand dream. Their lives did not matter to him at all when compared to his missions, and hence Griffith never had a personal relationship with anyone in the Band of the Hawk. Everyone Griffith met was just an extension of his burdening dream. For them, Griffith was a hero, a legend, a persona, and above all, a leader and their commander. Their relationship with him was more formal than personal. All of them respected him more than anyone else, but that was all Griffith was to them, a leader to be respected and a persona to be worshipped. Guts was the only person, probably the first one, who considered Griffith as a fellow human and a friend, and not a military leader to be always appeased and bootlegged and get associated and recognized with his conquests. Though Guts' unparalleled fighting abilities and his remarkable strength clearly made him an extremely important asset for Griffith, but Guts was even more to Griffith than just a strategic resource. Guts' raw and informal behavior and his free-spirited independent persona was captivating for Griffith. His living in the moment personality and ready to die without any remorse or guilt mindset were something very different, or more precisely completely opposite to Griffith's philosophies and worldviews. It was as if Guts made Griffith feel like a free human and experience his inner self when he was around him, making him a bit relieved amidst all the burdening chaos, as if Guts was someone with whom he could share his burden of the grand dream and would want to reach its end with him, as if Guts' companionship became as important as his dreams, and he wanted both of these to coexist. This personal and emotional connection to Guts made him a very significant part of not just his dreams, but also of his intimate life. This is the reason why Griffith saved Guts' life during his battle with Nosferatu Zord by putting his own life and his dreams on risk, an action Griffith would never commit for someone else. Even Guts was confused with Griffith risking his life for him and directly asked the reason behind it. Though the question was direct, Griffith did not answer it. Not because he didn't want to, but because Griffith himself did not know the answer to it. As the story progresses, it becomes quite evident that Griffith somehow for the first time ever, during the quest for his grand dream, developed a very deep and unconscious kind of longing and care for guts, an emotion too complex for someone like Griffith to even understand, who had an orphaned and unsocial childhood and a history of suppressing emotions. Some readers believe that Griffith may have developed a romantic liking towards guts rather than a platonic one, which would explain Griffith's biasness towards guts as compared to his other band members. But I think this debate should be left for some other future video. What's more important to this video is that Griffith cared for guts. And since Griffith had a very different worldviews and identity as compared to the others, he sees guts as his property. This is because Griffith is naturally like this for the sake of his dreams. Despite the person being as important as guts, Griffith handles this emotion in his way. That is to make others subservient towards him and exert his will on his subjects in order to maintain his divine persona and identity and keep the balance of the hierarchy he himself built among his men and carry that hierarchy even further, trying to keep it untainted even by his most important companion Guts. But Guts was not an ordinary man who just happened to appear in Griffith's life out of nowhere for the sake of serving him the rest of his life. He was a force of destiny who would soon unknowingly create ripples in the causality. Griffith was reaching to a higher level of political power with each slow but calculated steps. As his rank in the society and political power started to grow, he became even more vicious with his plans and actions. He showcased his brilliant levels of intelligence while dealing with the powerful nobles and authoritarians. During his siege of Doldray, Griffith kills Lord Gannon, the noble to whom Griffith once prostituted himself for securing funds for his soldiers. But Griffith did not kill Gannon out of any feeling of vengeance or violation. Rather, he killed him so that his controversial relationship with him doesn't get spilled in the society, which could have easily corrupted his image. As usual, it was an action for his dreams rather than for himself. Griffith further starts to use assassination tactics to kill his immediate threats and enemies. He immediately gets General Julius assassinated through Guts when he finds out that it was Julius who ordered his assassination through the poisoned arrow. Further, he kidnaps Minister Foss's daughter upon finding that Foss and the Queen of Midland were also involved in his assassination attempt. He armed Twist Foss to get all his enemies, including the Queen, gather in the narrow tower of Windham for celebrations, and then sets the tower on fire, killing the Queen and her accomplices, a ruthless process of getting rid of most of his immediate enemies. These aggressive actions made his obsession more apparent and clearer not only to his comrades but also to himself. Hence he is seen a couple of times asking Guts about what all he is doing. Is it cruel? This kind of retrospection indicates that Griffith himself is not comfortable with his sudden political upheaval and the effective actions he had to take in the recent course of time. This shows that though Griffith is ruthless and aggressive for his dreams, he is definitely not evil or inherently immoral and corrupt. He has a tendency to reflect upon his steps and efforts. This incident and his conversation with Casca give us a clearer view about his character that up until this point, Griffith is neither a kind-hearted savior nor a cold-hearted evil tyrant. He is a bit complicated and layered on the spectrum of humanity. Some of his thoughts and actions were dynamic and relied heavily on his goals and dreams, while most of it was fixed like an identity of the White Falcon, who was a great leader and a divine persona. While his conversation with Princess Charlotte, Griffith opens up briefly about his deepest thoughts and his purpose of life. He speaks up about the significance of a dream in a man's life and terms it as the most precious thing in the world. According to him, the most virtuous and exemplary thing a man can do in his life is to pursue and achieve his dreams at any given cost. He metaphorically states his own dream as one of the grandest, like an enormous storm which devours tens of thousands of other dreams and submerges them in its own. He believes that a life without pursuit of a said dream is not a life worth living and considers it to be meaningless. He can't even think of living such a hollow and empty life not marked by ambition and desire. Through his perspective, dreams are the source and driving force of a life. One must completely immerse, intoxicate and get obsessed by this driving force and make it the one and only reason for their existence, as this dream will guide them in their darkest days and hold their hands in their deepest sufferings. When the mind and the body will become lethargic to life itself, it will be this dream which will keep whispering the path back towards greatness and will keep rejuvenating the soul before it dries out to infinity. Griffith also briefly mentions about his views on others around him, like his comrades who vowed their lives for making him achieve his dreams. He very honestly addresses them as just his valuable soldiers without tagging them in any form of personal relationships. Griffith was beyond these intimate emotions and had set clear and hard boundaries and identities with his comrades. They were just a valuable asset for him, and hence they were exhaustible. At their end, they were just a martyr for his cause. Therefore, despite being such a strong and valuable army for a long time, none of them were his friends and no one existed inside his personal boundaries. This is the point where Griffith's identity of the one above all and the one who was the great among the mere beings gets highlighted once again. In his mind, he had already glorified himself amongst others. He had a strong identity carved inside his mind that he was the chosen one among them and only he would be the one to achieve his dreams. His identity about himself was so grand and divine that he simply considered all of them unequal to himself. The only person he would ever consider an equal and a friend was someone with the same formidable and obsessive mindset just like him. A person who was alive for achieving something unfathomable and impossible. A person with a dream who would never backslide on it and will protect his dreams at all cost against everyone, even against someone as great as him without a shred of doubt. A person with a sheer force of will walking with a clear mind towards a set direction. That will be a man he shall consider his equal. This level of obsession, mindset and reasoning for achieving his dreams clearly indicated that Griffith wanted to have his own kingdom not for any noble cause like uplifting people from suffering and poverty or saving them from the cruel and wild world and create a utopia for the betterment of his subjects. Rather, he wanted all of it just for himself. The first and the only reason his kingdom shall exist was because he wanted it in the first place, and therefore the subjects of his kingdom will always be an exhaustible asset for him and his empire, ready to be sacrificed at any moment if the situation demanded it. This mentality of Griffith in these initial chapters already acted as a foreshadow of the brutal sacrifice he gave during the Eclipse. This does not mean that Griffith would be economically or militarily a terrible king for his empire. With his innate intelligence and talent, he would definitely be able to create a successful and prosperous empire. But the heart of the empire for him would always be the empire itself and not the people in it. And hence when things would go south and tough situations would arrive, leaders like Griffith with no emotion towards his subjects will always use his people as the leverage against all forms of collateral damage. This kind of leadership is extremely disastrous for the people of a kingdom in the long run. Ironically, this is the form of leadership that humanity has seen for the most part of its real history, and it still continues today even in the democratic countries. The leaders become the empire and its identity and not the people and its resources. Griffith, like a force of nature, after killing most of his enemies and becoming a noble of Midland, was now closest to his dream he has ever been. But fate had something else planned for the invincible hawk. Guts decides to leave the band of the Hawk. Inspired by his friend Griffith's ideologies, he decides to embark on his own dreams and create a purpose for his existence. But even more than that, he wanted to become equal to Griffith and not to be identified as his mere asset. He wanted to leave the band as a friend of Griffith, not just in his perception, but in Griffith's perception too. But this branching of a new ideology was about to become problematic for Griffith, who was so close to achieve his dreams. As we have discussed Griffith's and Guts' relationship earlier, Guts was extremely valuable to Griffith. His absence would create a massive void in his life, which he feared wouldn't even heal by the accomplishment of his dreams. Griffith tries to stop Guts from leaving by challenging him in a duel, the way it all started. This was probably because of Griffith's overconfident belief in himself, that no one was above him and that he could not lose because of his immaculate career. But Guts defied all of Griffith's expectations. He defeated the invincible Hawk in a single blow. This defeat was an extremely important and pivotal event in the story of Berserk, as it shattered many rigid sets of beliefs that Griffith had. All of a sudden, many of his truths collapsed and he went through an abrupt barrage of emotions too complex to handle. His complete world perceptions crumbled in a moment. How can a nihilist man with no dreams, aspirations and directions could defeat him, abandon him and challenge his great ideologies? Was his beliefs and views wrong? Was he living a false life this whole time? Was he no more invincible and now equal to the others? These were some of the emotions and questions that were bombarding Griffith at that very instant. His emotional feelings for Guts also started controlling and crumbling his formidable mind. The feelings which he purposely did not suppress and left it inside himself started to create a chaos inside him. After Guts left, Griffith finally realized how important Guts had become for him, shockingly as important as his lifelong dream. Griffith fell prey to his only emotional attachment, the kind of attachment he was never fond of, and ran away all his life. But now the damage was already done. His mind was constantly fixated on this single crippling event. And now through one wrong, uncalculated and a hasty decision, Griffith was about to destroy all of his life's work in the blink of an eye. To cope up with these uneasy emotions, Griffith tries to seek comfort through Charlotte, forcing himself on her as if trying to gain back the honor and the power he was stripped of by Guts. But even while making love to her, he would just think about Guts, unable to run away from those damaging sentiments, constantly being drowned in his destroyed world. This treason landed him into the everlasting night of punishment and torture. He was thrown into the deepest abyss of Midland and was tortured and abused for a year. The torture described in the manga was horrific and depressing. He was starved to bones, his arms and legs were permanently damaged, his tongue was cut, his skin was ripped apart from many places, and he even was violated uncountable times by the torturer. But even in those hellish darkest days, he would think about Guts standing tall beside his castle of dreams. Unknowingly, Griffith had reached to a point of obsession towards Guts. While being rescued by Guts, Griffith can be seen furious. Enraged by his bitter feelings, he tries to choke Guts with his lifeless hands, as if saying that all of this was his doing. He was the reason behind his demolished body and shattered life. Further, when he notices the recent romantic relationship between Guts and Casca, he starts to lose the remaining sanity of his frivolous existence. In his perception, Guts did not just defeat and abandon him, he destroyed the very basis of his life and was now even taking away Casca from him, the only woman who was truly devoted to him. Worried about even losing Casca's devotion, for the one last time Griffith tries to force himself upon her as a way of re-establishing his dominance, just like he did to Princess Charlotte when Guts abandoned him. To his surprise, Casca resists Griffith on herself. Seeing this rejection, Griffith is devastated. On the verge of his breaking point like a hallucinated madman, he makes one last futile try to grab his dream and seek comfort while everything was falling apart. But destiny was ready to give him the last push, concluding the death of the White Hawk. While lying in the puddle, Griffith finally realizes that everything was gone. His body was beyond repair and he was a cripple for life. The dream, which was the basis of his entire existence, was decimated to dust. Unable to accept the reality, he laughs hysterically and decides to end his life. But his destiny already had other plans for him. The Crimson Beherit, the egg of the king, came back to him as he was prophesied to become the fifth member of the God Hand. Griffith finally entered into his dark fate, where he was given a choice to either continue his pitiful and crippled life, which was against his essence and honor, or give a massive sacrifice of his comrades in that fateful eclipse to gain the power of the gods. After being manipulated by the other angelic demons about how he had already stood on the mountain of corpses in his journey, the people who gave their lives for his cause over the years, this sacrifice should not be something new for him as their lives already did not matter to him. Griffith chose the sacrifice and initiates the eclipse. While his comrades were being slaughtered like cattle by the hands of the terrifying demons, Griffith was being reborn as Femto, the prophesied fifth angelic demon of the God Hand. But Griffith did not just stop at this sacrificial slaughter. After taking his evilest form, he further goes on to rape Casca while staring at helpless and strangled Guts, mocking him with his new demonic reptilian eyes, breaking Casca mentally as a form of revenge against Guts. The event of the eclipse in Berserk was one of the most horrifying incidents that I had ever seen in any form of fictional story. The manga panels were brutal and terrifying, showcasing us the dark universe of Berserk. But this dark incident of the eclipse also gave us the glimpse in the mind of Griffith and what kind of irredeemable monster he had now become. Worst of it was, all of this happened because Griffith chose it to happen. It is true that he was manipulated and provoked by the other members of the God Hand, but in the end, he was the cause of it all. He did this because his character was always competent to do this. In his perception, no one was his equal. His comrades were always his exhaustible assets. He finally proved himself to be the kind of leader who would sacrifice all his subjects without hesitation in the face of calamity. Griffith died with his last shred of humanity. Now it was Femto who would go on to reshape the world order for the unrevealed plan of the God Hand. Griffith, or now Femto, takes rebirth into the mortal world as a divine entity after the reincarnation ceremony at Albion. The manga panel showing Griffith's reptilian eyes proved that this was Femto hiding as a wolf in sheep's clothing. He confronts Guts to make sure that he does not have any emotions left inside of him from his previous birth. Though he expresses no signs of any tender feelings on the outside, it is shown clearly that he still has a faint emotion for Guts and Casca lying somewhere deep inside his psyche. He figures out that this emotion is because of his connection with a demon child, the distorted offspring of Guts and Casca, who was tainted by Griffith's sexual violation of Casca. Before the reincarnation ceremony, the egg of the perfect world apostle consumes this demon child, allowing the child to become a part of the vessel that Griffith now inhabits. This influences Griffith's new form with a protective instinct towards Casca and Guts. This small and subtle detail is further connected with the incident of the Moonlight Child in the story, which we will discuss in the last part of this video. In this rebirth, Griffith has grander plans for himself and the God Hand. In his previous birth, he was already established as a legend across all of Midland, but this time he is divinity personified. With all his new godly powers and religious lores, he is literally an incarnation of God for the people, despite being a vanguard of the God Hand in this material realm. It is true that he fights against the demon king Ganishka and his ruthless army with his unmatched supernatural powers, but all of this is just an act. We already know that this reincarnated Griffith is actually a fraud who pushed the entire world into an age of darkness. All of these terrible incidents were set in motion by the members of the God Hand, including him. Him killing Ganishka served many purposes for his cult to flourish, as well as his bigger objective to overlap the material world with the astral world. It is because of Griffith, the hellish demons took over the entire planet, making it extremely unsafe for living and thriving. So he creates a false heaven with his powers in the form of Falconia, where all his subjects can stay safe and thrive without any suffering and insecurity, ruling over them like a noble emperor. This was a dream which he followed his entire life, and now it was a reality. But this time everything is an act. He is fooling the entire world by masquerading as a false prophet and a savior of all. His subjects do not have a slight idea that all of the suffering was created by Griffith himself. Currently, it is unclear what Griffith and the other members of the God Hand wants to achieve through all this fraudulent act. Who knows, maybe he is raising the subjects of his kingdom as cattle for another genocidal massacre ritual. But even in this divine form, Griffith is still tainted. Due to his connection with the demon child of Guts and Casca, he still has a shred of humanity inside of him in the form of his care and longing for them. During the night of the full moon, Griffith takes the form of the Moonlight Child and helps Guts whenever he is in a treacherous situation, or just keeps company with him, Casca and his group. Maybe because the remnant of the original Griffith inside him longs for the compassion of his closest friends and wants to cherish the memories together. Despite him achieving everything he ever wanted, he still feels lonely and empty sitting alone at the top of his new kingdom. It is a polarizing characteristic where Femto is the soulless demon with a greater purpose in the realm of mortals, but on the other hand, the remains of Griffith inside him attracts him to the warmth of humanity. After Kentaro Miura passed away, the incredible story of Berserk and the journey of Griffith has an uncertain future. The loss of such a great artist is devastating not just for the fans of Berserk, but also to his unfinished masterpiece. Though his assistants are continuing his work, and we can only hope that they provide the same level of justice to the story as Miura did it for 3 decades. He wrote Griffith with incredible intricacy, giving the character an enormous depth and complexity, making him one of the greatest characters in the manga history. Despite Griffith's vile and sadistic character growth, his quest for his dream felt personal to all its readers. Irrespective of the choices and the paths he took, his journey resonated with most of us who have a purpose to fulfill in their life despite it being grand or ordinary, showing us the significance of balance and sanity while walking this adventurous path. When does an ambition turns into an obsession, and when that obsession turns into a sin and starts to devour everything in its path? When does the identity of the human itself carrying that ambition is lost? Griffith's story is a tragedy where a man is consumed by his dreams throughout his existence without exploring the other beautiful aspects of life. A man cursed by destiny and controlled by his obsession, who didn't just massacre the ones who were faithful to him, but also strangled his own identity and humanity to become the purest form of evil.